example of that. We are interconnected in ways that are, just profound. And as a result, it's more important that we educate our children to become global citizens, not just citizens in their communities, but think about themselves in a broader context. Kathy Short, who's a teacher educator, talked about the understanding of global cultures is a necessity. It's not a luxury. It shouldn't be a kind of an add-on curriculum. We need to, this is important because we are so interconnected. And Pernell Ripp really emphasizes that schools must provide students with opportunities to connect the dots that surround them with the outside world. She also says that she asserts that we need to find ways to weave in global competency and support students learn with the world about the world. And that quote really stuck with me because when I originally thought about this project, I do a lot of children's literature from around the world, which I think is, a total advocate of it. I still am. But I feel like that was learning about the world, which is really important. So I'm not negating that, but that learning with the world, learning together, kind of putting kids on the same playing field in terms of learning about each other directly, not through books written by a third person that's gone through a publishing company. And it really made me think, how can children learn with other children who are their kind of contemporaries in a closer way? So, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So I thought about how important global education is in the K-12 world. And again, my world is more K-8. And then I looked around. I actually did a very short survey and started looking around, and I noticed that there's really a lack of existing curriculum around global issues and cultures. I know the communities I work in, there's very little bit about global citizenship or in global issues in the K-12, K-8 classrooms. I actually surveyed right before I did this project because I wanted to know more about what global curriculum, global issues look like in K-8 classrooms. So I surveyed some teachers, 75 teachers, 5 different countries, because I wanted to know what it was like in different countries to understand how global citizenship looked in elementary classrooms. And only 13% of these teachers indicated that they were even able to cover or touch or just incorporate anything about intercultural awareness, global citizens in their classrooms. So I probed a little bit more. I said, well, why is that? Only 13% of teachers, and frankly, that's probably a high number. I know in my country, the United States, I don't think it is that high. I know from the schools that I work with, 13 was probably an a bigger number, a bigger percentage. So I really asked teachers, and actually 75 were surveyed, but I probably talked to, over 100. And I said, well, why is that? What, it's so important. Our world is shrinking. This is not a luxury. It's a necessity. And teachers came back and they said, well, it's really hard for us to find ways to integrate it into our required curriculum. We're just not sure how to do that. Or we lack the resources and materials. Or we have trouble finding those texts that are aligned with grade level appropriateness. Or we don't have time to collaborate. So that really got me thinking, how can I kind of fill that hole or help teachers think about global citizenship, interconnection, intercultural awareness in a different way? Hold on one second. Where is my, okay. So I thought about it. I think I said this earlier on, and I thought a lot about first using children's literature. And then I thought, yeah, but that I wanted kids to be more direct with each other. And then I really kept coming back to the walk a day in your shoes, theory, or not theory, but that expression. And I looked a little bit. I mean, this is something we all kind of know this term, but basically to walk a day in your shoes is to spend time to consider or understand others' perspectives, experiences, motivations, before we make judgments about them. I'm going to actually go down to quotes. I found this: the earliest traces of this proverb date back to the Cherokee tribe of Native Americans who said, "Don't judge a man until you've walked a mile in his shoes." And Harper Lee in To Kill a Mockingbird says, "You never really know a man until you climb or till you understand things from his point of view." And I thought about the fact that shoes are pretty common in every nationality. Not, I mean, maybe not some, and I know I'm making a cultural judgment, but shoes being something they all have in common. And I really wanted to connect with those commonalities and connection. And I wanted to find an opportunity to center students' stories, their real world. What does a day in your shoes look like? And that's kind of why I settled on shoes. I felt like that was the metaphor that, and the connecting point for students to really understand others. What does your day, a day in your shoes, what does that day look like? So what I did, and actually, since then I found this, I don't know if I click on this link, what's going to happen. Oh, something happened. I just found this the other day, and I just thought this was fabulous. Again, I did this. This is a mental health resource, but I thought, oh gosh, this is kind of what I was thinking. And Laura, I think I read that this is a theme for you, so I hope you get to talk a little bit more about this. I thought this was really cool. This is a website that has kids' stories, and you click on their shoes, and they give the stories from, and I thought, that's fabulous. That's exactly kind of where I was going in my mind with this as well. And actually, and I'm thinking of you, Laura, because I actually heard right around this time when I was percolating about this project, I heard about a museum where they literally had shoes that people could put on. And when they put on the shoes, there was a QR code, and they could watch the story of that person's shoes. And I was like, well, that's what I want to do. So that's what I did. I mean, not quite in that way. I wish it could have been as big as, something really cool and interactive about that. But that's kind of where I situated this project. And I do want to say this was not this is a mini project, but I'm hoping that by sharing it, I developed some curriculum around this, that other people could kind of either take this project or take ideas or stimulate their ideas. How can they help students think about this? So I'm going to share 3 phases to this project. Phase 1, I was really curious, what do kids know about kids in other countries? This is a good time to say this project happened in 6 different countries, and I'm going to be completely honest that these 6 countries were countries in which I had connections with. So it was a convenient sampling in that way. They also are not as culturally diverse or ethnically diverse as I would have liked. But I am also going to be transparent that I didn't have a whole lot of money to do this trip. So in that way, it kind of limited how I could kind of start with this. But the schools that I worked with, there was one in Morocco and Tangier, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, Portland, Maine in the United States, outside of, well, actually it was Cork, Ireland, Maison Lafitte, which is a suburb of Paris in France, and Bucharest in Romania. Excuse me. And one interesting thing I did, I actually was able to go to the classrooms in each one of these countries. And one thing I did at first, before we even started, I said, what do you know about Morocco? So I'd ask the kids, in every country, what they knew about the other countries. And these are some word clouds of words, they did a word splash. It was really interesting, just even visually, if you can kind of see, around the world, kids didn't know a whole lot about Morocco. And actually, the interesting thing, if you look at some of these things or some of the words that they came up with, often they didn't even know correct things. For example, with Romania, when I asked kids in Malaysia and Morocco and the United States and France and Ireland, what do you know about Romania? They said Roman numerals or gladiators, not even close. But it was really important to me. Actually, one interesting thing one child knew about Romania is apparently the flags of Chad and Romania are very similar, which I didn't even know. But it was really interesting to me to have the students think, well, what do I know about these countries? And kind of talk about how do we know certain things? And what are the cultural things that kind of rise to the top of children's awareness? So that was kind of the first step. The second phase is all of these kids in the schools that I worked with created a story about the day of a life in their shoes. And so I'm going to go back for a second. The goal of this project was to open up students' worlds for them to see, what were kids in Bucharest? What was their day like? What were the kids in Tangier's days like? If I walked in the shoes of this child from Paris, what would their day be like? So opening up their worlds and hopefully start kind of breaking down some of these preconceptions that we have as well. That's knowledge that kind of exists in the world that may not or may be accurate. I did want to create a curriculum that I could share with other teachers. And I'm assuming because you found me through one of the articles I wrote that people are reading this, so that's exciting. I shared this project with other teachers so they could replicate this idea, or at least it would stimulate their thinking about other ideas they could do in the classroom. And again, to help students and teachers connect those dots to the world around them. So again, the first thing I did to prepare is I did create a curriculum, and maybe Mohammed will be able to share this PowerPoint. It does have some links, so there is a curriculum here. I also created a website, which at the moment is down, so I can't give you that link, but a YouTube channel as well. That's where all the students' digital stories lived. And so what they did is they created digital stories. They used iMovies or, gosh, in Morocco, they didn't have iMovies. I can't remember. WeVideo. They used WeVideo over in Morocco to create stories about their lives. And we had a YouTube channel. So they could see the stories from the classrooms around the globe. So here are the kids in Portland, Maine. This was, again, a convenience of that school's right across the street from my house. So that seemed like a good starting point. And the kids did storyboarding about what their day of their life was like. They used iPads and created digital stories. And then those stories went to Tangier, Morocco, where the kids watched the stories, they brainstormed what's our life like, what are our stories that we can tell, and then each child wrote their own story that they shared. It was kind of like a chainmail thing in the sense that they shared them with the kids in Maine, but also the kids who are, future, because the next stop was Bucharest, Romania. And I don't know why you still see Anwar's story here. That just might be a YouTube link thing, but and worked with fourth graders there. And then we were in Maison Lafitte. I do want to say that another limitation to this project was all the stories were in English. So all the schools they either were bilingual schools or the kids did their stories in English. I would have loved to have had some more linguistically diverse stories, but again, this was kind of a beginning project here. Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and you can see there the kids working on their stories. So they watched the stories from all the other countries. They wrote their own, what's a day in the life of their shoes? What is their worlds like? And Cork, 6th grade. This is a boys' school, and this was a little challenging because they didn't have technology at the school. So again, they had access. They did have a computer lab we were able to use, but they didn't have a whole lot of computers. I actually brought iPads with me, which is always a funny. It turned out to be a little bit of a funny thing. Me traveling in the world, around the world with 20 iPads in my suitcase. I did get some looks from security people on that one. And then, so basically kids in each one of these places wrote their own stories, and they watched each other's stories on the YouTube link, and really were able to think about, wow, how are we alike? How are we different? What am I learning that's beyond, I'm going back for a second, kind of this pop culture or what we think we know, and how is that different? And then my last stop or last phase is I created a traveling exhibit that could go to other schools. And this traveling exhibit, if you can see these pictures, I actually had, this was again inspired by this story I heard about this museum where you could actually put on people's shoes and hear their stories. So it was enough to travel with iPads. I couldn't travel with kids' shoes, but what I did is I took pictures of the shoes, and you can see those up in the top right-hand corner with a QR code to their story, and surrounded a library in flags and pictures and the students' stories, and you can kind of see. So what kids in elementary schools did is they walked around the library with, you can see they've got iPads and headphones, and they would scan those QR codes and listen to the kids, other children's stories, kids just their age who wrote stories about a day in the life of their shoes. And you can kind of see how all the kids are walking around. So again, set this up in school libraries. They had the QR code. They could listen to other children's stories, these digital stories. And there were whiteboards positioned around the library space for students to jot down what are some things you're thinking, what questions do you have, what were some similarities, what were some differences, what are you learning about children around the world. And there were exit slips as well to track their thinking. So interesting, and here's a map of all the different countries, and also some information that I forgot to mention this, the kids in different countries wanted kids to know about. This is what our lives are like, directly from the students themselves. And interestingly, just thinking about, I love the fact that the students saw so many similarities. That, and again, these are 10 through 15-year-olds. The students really recognize, wow, in Malaysia, they love the same video games we do, or they have a similar food interest, or they love their pets and they like to read and enjoy sports. And interestingly, those similarities outweighed the differences. Students were really fascinated that around the globe, total different part of the world, these children were so similar to themselves. And I think we need to think about those similarities, because so often we live in a world of cultural difference and not being able to relate to others. I think that was really powerful. Some of the quotes the kids said is, it made me realize how similar we all are, even across the world. I like this child, I remember, she said, it also made me want to travel, which was awesome. It made me realize how alike my day is to other kids' days. And it made me happy because there's a girl just like me. They were just so interested in the fact that children around the world have so many similarities. But they also really paid attention to those differences. And they were fascinated by the differences in schools. Some school students wore uniforms, some didn't. Some got to go sledding on their playground, others had pools. But those differences were usually just shades of similarities, different pets, different musicians, different gaming systems, again, lots of kids were very interested in the video games. And as I said, they were really curious about the differences in schools, which makes sense. These are children who spend most of their lives in schools. And when they got to watch videos about other children's schools, why do you raise chickens? Why is your playground on the roof? Why do you have an hour and a half for lunch? Why do you have a slide inside your school? Why do boys and girls not go to the same school? And it really helped them question and think about these differences. And again, children talked about, even though there are these differences, there's so much we have in common. So again, I recognize some challenges, and I think I mentioned this earlier. The schools were from different countries, but they did represent very similar cultural traditions for the most part. I would have liked to have had more linguistic diversity, different, very different cultural traditions. And technology, again, this is pre-pandemic, actually. It'd be interesting to do it now, where I feel like people might be a little bit technology is a little more pervasive now in schools. But I think we do need to recognize, when I even just said that, the popular rhetoric that technology is omnipresent, but there are still really sharp digital divides in different countries, communities, and within classrooms themselves. The YouTube channel became a little bit of a more difficult piece than I had anticipated, just because of challenges in the advertisements that would shown on YouTube. Some parents didn't want their children's videos on YouTube, unsanctioned videos that would come up after YouTube. We talked about maybe we could have a more secure or teacher tube for this. But the whole point of this project is really to think about how can we weave in these opportunities for children to start engaging in global competency and in global understanding. So I'm going to end my presentation. I think that was about 20. Oh, wow, that was a lot more than 20 minutes. But I am going to end with this, with just some other thoughts, or when I've been talking to other people, some other ideas. And one thing that really was important for these children was having that commonality about the shoes. And there's some wonderful resources out there. One's a great book about daily bread, what kids eat around the world. And that, again, having a starting point where children can say, we all eat, but how do we eat? But not how do we eat, but how is food different in different places? And how can we understand culture through food? Or homes. There's a wonderful book by Ellis about different homes in different communities as well. So I'm going to stop here because that was longer than I thought it would be. I guess I just got a little excited as I was doing this. And I just wanted to stop and maybe, Laura, this is a time you can kind of talk about your work or your thinking, or if people have questions or have ideas. I mean, that's what I'd like to kind of leave this with.
Thank you, Lane. That was a very interesting presentation. And yes, your enthusiasm and passion for this subject really comes through. I think that all of us were very interested and fascinated by this work, which seems to have been a very large project to take on. I will go ahead and share my presentation, and then we will have a conversation, questions about it, especially looking at the two presentations together and how they might be related or synthesized. So let me share my screen. And so, as I already introduced myself, I'm Laura Edith Coleman. I'm director of the Responsible Cultural Leadership Graduate Certificate Program at Drexel University. So today's topic and title is Walk a Day in My Shoes. It's on the phenomena of shoes and empathy in museums. So first, I'd like to say that I did not start off looking at shoes or footwear or even empathy in museums. My initial interest in museums revolved around social inclusion and curatorial voice. So as a doctoral student, I began to research the socially inclusive role of curatorial voice, how curators created narratives that were either inclusive or exclusive. And as a library and information science specialist, I sought to apply library and information science and information gatekeeping mechanisms to further our understanding of how curators constructed their curatorial voice. I continued my research into curatorial voice for the past 9 years. And I think it's important, before I go much further, to give you some descriptions. Perhaps there is not a definition of curatorial voice, but some descriptions of curatorial voice. So one is that curatorial voice is the message received by museum goers throughout the exhibit, a message that may relay intent or museum authority. This is a message that we may not see, we may not read, but it is one that we feel. Perhaps it is not spoken aloud, but it is one that we know is there and is crafted by curators. It is also described as the unassailable voice, an essential part of the museum experience. It is an institutional tone and attitude that pervades museum labels, brochures, exhibitions, catalogs, etc. Every aspect of museum work is interwoven with the idea of curatorial voice and what is provided in that narrative and what is not. So, strangely enough, shoes became a part of my research, despite the fact that I have very little experience with footwear and shoes, especially as a psychological phenomenon. And so I questioned, what is the role of shoes in curatorial voice? What is interesting is that in the many years that I have studied curators and museum professionals in describing how they construct their voice within the museum, every single one, without exception, has mentioned shoes, whether it's to walk a day in my shoes, to put someone else in a different in another person's shoes, to have empathy through shoes. And although I didn't set out to study this, I have become fascinated by the role of shoes in understanding. I went to 5 national museums here in the United States to study this. I've also studied this across many smaller and medium-sized museums. Please note that the limitations of this study have been that it has been completely within the United States, English-speaking American museums. Shoes appeared in many of the exhibits and installations as physical items. So at the 9/11 Memorial Museum in New York City, this is a pair of shoes. It was a pair of shoes worn by a woman who was a survivor and was fleeing the collapse of the Twin Towers during 9/11/2001. And the shoes serve as a reminder, a very powerful one, of the actions that happened that day, the tragedy that happened that day. And they also speak to the woman who wore them and her particular story. The National Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta, Georgia. And although the curators talked about shoes, they had a very interesting way of allowing people to encounter what it is to live in someone else's body, not just their shoes, but to live in the body of someone else. So on one side of the screen, there is a photo from the civil rights movement at the Woolworth counter, where African Americans who were not allowed to sit at the counter. This was only for white people to sit at. And as a form of peaceful protest, these gentlemen sat at the counter. And you can see behind them, there are police officers, and all of them are white. And, they're waiting to be able to take them away. In many instances, these became violent, and those who sat patiently and quietly protesting at the lunch counter were abused or even harmed. On the right hand of the screen, you see school children and parents, and they have placed their hands on a counter and they are wearing headphones. And the way this particular exhibit works within the museum is that the museum goer puts on the headphones, they place their hand onto the counter, and a timer starts. Along with it starts the abuse. It's a recording of abuse from the civil rights movement. And when you take your hands off the counter, the abuse stops. And when you put them on, it returns. And it is a very powerful way of putting individuals into the bodies of those who have come before them. I've done this before. It was very traumatic. And I was only able to keep the headphones on for 32 seconds before I threw them off. And when I threw them off and moved away from this particular exhibit, there was a wonderful, lovely old lady who was standing there with a Kleenex, a box of tissues, and she gave me a hug and told me that it was going to be okay. And while this was a form of putting oneself into one's skin inside someone else's body, it was also very traumatic. And one form of empathy that was there when you finished was that someone was there to give you a hug and to tell you that you were okay. The Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles. In this particular museum, although it has been recently updated, completely rebuilt, for many years it was a very static museum. And what made it dynamic was that the tours of it, you went through the museum with a docent, and that docent would tell you about their story concerning being a Japanese American, about being either themselves or their parents being forced into the illegal imprisonment of Japanese Americans during World War II. And they helped students and families and adults to understand what it is like to walk in their shoes. Shoes were not always a source of sadness. At the Arab American National Museum in Detroit, Michigan, shoes also conveyed happiness and joy and understanding of each other's traditions. So shoes can be a positive as well as a negative, and empathetic and one that shows differences but also similarities. The Wing Luke Museum in Seattle, Washington. I have found their use of empathy throughout the years as one of the most well-thought, community-based museums I have ever seen. And empathy is at the core of everything they do. In this particular exhibit, this is a suitcase of an immigrant coming to the United States. And many of their exhibits are about you putting yourself in the shoes of an immigrant, of a person who's been through a particularly traumatic situation, and how you get through that journey. So why shoes? In my research, I had not set out to study shoes. And so I was quite confused by the presence of shoes in my work. And several things have come to mind. One is that there is this sort of near universality of shoes in the human experience. There are many people and cultures in the world where shoes are not a part of their experience, but feet are. And there are people on the planet who cannot walk or do not have feet. But there is a very strong thread throughout our world of the use of shoes. Shoes signify the human right to walk, to change, to seek new lives and experiences. So shoes may start uniform. If you go to a shoe shop or you go to look in someone's closet, they may have several shoes that are the same size. They may start off as new and similar or identical to someone else's pair of shoes. But as they're worn, they conform to the human's foot. They become torn. They start to adjust to the physical features of the foot that walks in them. And throughout that passage of time, they become specific to the user who wore them. I have often been amused by children who attempt to fill the shoes of their parents. Shoes have been a metaphor for allowing ourselves to become other people, to see who we could be that's better, and to indicate that we can grow through that process. Shoes also indicate walking, which is a passage or a journey, one that's either done by yourself or with others. Walking can be simply for the pleasure of walking, but it may also be the passage of time or to go on a journey from one place to another. So as we continue today to talk about walking in someone's shoes, I'd like to consider the physicality of shoes. These are physical objects, much like any object you'd find in a museum. They concern the wearer and the stories that are told by that wearer, and those who try to wear those shoes later in time. For example, my mother passed down her wooden shoes to me, and I was so excited. But then I realized that my feet did not fit them well on the inside, and that it would take time for the shoes to adjust to me. The narratives that we tell on our shared journey while walking together. Shoes aren't simply about something that we wear when we walk. It's what we talk about when we walk, what we do as we walk. And one of my favorite sayings is a verse from the Bible, which is, "How can two walk together unless they are agreed?" And the idea that if you're going to have a conversation with someone, you have to be walking with them. You have to be on the same pathway together, for it is very difficult to be going in different directions and to have a conversation without the empathy that is required to walk together. So I know my presentation was much shorter than Lane's, but I did want to get to our question and conversation time. If you have any questions for me that are specific to my work, please feel free to reach out to me at lsc64@drexel.edu. And so I'd like to thank you and open this up to conversation. And it looks like Lorraine had to leave. But if we could open this up to conversation, where would we like to start?
Let me break the ice with a smile. Why I bring smile is this week at Center for Excellence, we are celebrating the World Kindness Week together with the global pattern of global event of November 13th to 17th or November 13th to 19th as the week of kindness. It started with World Kindness Day on November 13th. We did celebrate November 13th on that day. And this whole week is part of the World Kindness Together. And people can get that kindness feeling with a smile. I have a little story about it. I'll just take 30 seconds, not 30 seconds, a little more. There's a guy in literature called Mullah Nasiruddin. He's got folk tales. In one of the folk tales, this guy narrates that he went to a small town and the king or the leader of that city took him to see the city and understand what the city looks like. So the two go for a walk. I don't know with shoes or without shoes. They go for a walk, and every person who sees this guy, the narrator, full Mullah Nasruddin, smiles at him, and they pass through the whole city and come back to the point where they started. The king is amazed. This is a new visitor to the city, and everyone is smiling at him. The story ends with Mullah Nasruddin saying, because I smiled, they smiled. So when we smile ourselves, others will smile based on the smile, and smile is tax-free. No country will charge you a tax on the smile. So let's be smiling, and let's be walking in somebody's shoes, somebody's life, somebody's body, somebody's impressions of what they have and what they are with, going through or have been facing such situations. Like, for example, as an immigrant, I came to Canada in 2000, but I came with a narrative from Ellis Island or Staten Island, the museum that says, that is a unique phrase and a quotation that I always remember. I came to America, it reads, I came to America and I was told that the streets are paved with gold. When I walked on the streets, I found that the streets are not paved with gold. And then the narrative says, and I was told to pave the streets with gold. So for me as an immigrant, I have to be building my own path, my own professional career, my own stress and stretch of finding a job in my own field. So that is an immigrant who needs to have a smiling approach to say that we are all human beings. We need to be thinking as a human beings rather than I am there, I am this, I'm that, and you are that, and you're not this, and you're not that, what I think kind of presumptions. So this is all about the kindness week that we are celebrating now. And we have a good message for people to smile and just smile. It takes no charge, it takes no cost, it takes no energies. Rather, it boosts the energies and helps a healthy lifestyle. I have one comment to add on this idea of empathy, which I found in the literature. There's another word coined called empathy. I'll just read out the definition that is given by the person who has coined this. I'd like to share the screen. Can't get it. I'll read it out. You can't share it now. Empathy is a term probably coined by Stephanie Newbrand. It's a culture of empathy builder. Empathy is a new psychological construct. It's also called intrusive empathy, understood as the ability to share in and understand one's own feelings, which is considered a critical psychological construct relevant for the recovery and maintenance of mental health. And the other term that I like to share is syntony. Syntony is the state of being normally responsive to and in harmony with the environment. And this term is used by Professor Alexander Laszlo in his publication called Curating a Culture of Peace and Empathy Through Syntony. Any thoughts on this empathy with I and syntony with S-Y-N-T-O-N-Y?
Thank you, Mohammed. Other questions or comments?
Professor Coleman, if I may, thank you so much, both of you, Dr. Clarke and Professor Coleman, for the wonderful presentation. Honestly, the research that you're doing in many cases is groundbreaking, and it is so interesting. If we all sort of got to dive a little bit deeper into all the nuances that are involved in the subjects that you are dealing with and the way that you are conducting the research. Thank you so much. I just wanted to make a few comments, a couple of comments actually. Dr. Clarke, thank you so much. This was a really enlightening research that you're doing with shoes. And, you know, and to do with global citizenship. Just to let you know that here in Canada, there's one college here that has global citizenship as a subject that every student that comes to the college must take. So whether you are an engineering student, whether you are a medical student, or you are an arts student, you must take this global citizenship course. And I have taught that course at the college, and I found it really fascinating because to try and get somebody to walk in somebody else's shoes. And so, just to share an example, one of the things that I utilize to get somebody to understand what another person is feeling or going through, especially for people who are physically challenged. So I got them, the class or the students to create an artificial challenge for them, like wearing a band on their eyes, and ask them to go and walk and go to the admin office and ask them that you wanted A, B, C, D, and just that challenge of them going from point A to point B and getting down the stairs and reaching that was an eye opener for them. So or somebody to have some heavy things tied to their legs to feel like how an old person would feel like, an elderly person would feel like. So that was an exercise that I used to conduct when I was teaching that course at that college. So this global citizenship, it is such an important thing, and I'm glad that Dr. Clarke, that you have addressed it from the K8, K12 cohort. I mean, they need to start learning. Kids needs to start learning and empathize. It is more to do with empathy, and so and understanding and humility as well, and understanding what the other party feels like or goes through. And so I also wanted to share, something that I experienced in regards to how children and schools in different parts of the world address things in a slightly different way. I really sort of was fascinated with your research, Dr. Clarke, about kids in different parts of the world trying to understand and getting to know what they were, what the other, a child in another country was experiencing and how they did things. So there was a video that I watched when I was doing my PhD. There was a video that I had watched that focused on conflict resolution. So there was a conflict between two children, and they focused on that conflict resolution between two children and how it was addressed. So they looked at it, from a class in the US, a class in the UK, a class in Japan, China, and I believe there was a class that they looked at from Malaysia or one of those countries. And it was so fascinating to see how conflict was resolved by the teacher or by the students themselves. And it was so interesting, and how the teacher used their authority in some instances, or in some places they used their authority to resolve those issues. And it's so interesting that when you see that type of um, resolution or methods that are being carried out in that small little environment, and then you see it, and then when I reflected on it and I said, hey, something very similar happens at the international level as well. These things sort of move from one stage to another, and at the international level it was similar practices that were being applied. What the teacher was applying in class to a grade 1 to a grade 2 students or kindergarten students was being applied at the international level as well. So that was so fascinating, and then and the connection that I tried to sort of make. Um, uh, so thank you so much for that insight, Dr. Clarke. It is so interesting, and I would love to see more of that. And if I'm doing any projects, I'm certainly going to use some of your suggestions that you have made in formulating a project or something here in this part of the world. Dr. Coleman, as always, you have been so interesting. I've been so fascinated by the work that you have been doing, and so I just wanted to sort of reflect on how you had those shoes that were new shoes first, and then over time they had changed. And what I was thinking about was, so I come from Africa, right? I was born and brought up there. And so when I go there on my trips there, and I see a lot of clothes and shoes being sold at a very reasonable rate. These are used clothes. That is a very, very big market. And so you see a lot of shoes, being sold as well. And so I was wondering, and I was reflecting on right now as you were talking, I was reflecting on it, and that flashback came to me about walking on the streets of Nairobi or Kenya or Mombasa or any other town in Africa, and seeing those shoes being sold, and they were very reasonably priced, because new shoes would be very expensive. But then the thought came to me that most of these shoes are from Europe or North America, and how these shoes were first worn by people from this part of from North America, or from Europe, and after being used they are now being sold to the to other countries that don't have those means, and how that colonial legacy sort of is tied to it. Even with those shoes, there is some colonial legacy that I see that that is tied to it, and that's something to sort of explore and dive into it. Shoes and how the colonial legacy can be tied to it. A topic of research, perhaps. To something to look into. I would really be happy to see something like that being done. Thank you so much once again to both of you. Amazing work that both of you are doing, and congratulations, and thank you for being part of this event today and sharing your experiences. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Silence is gold.
Hello.
We take this golden
Yeah.
rule, golden rule of silence and smiles. And so we move
There is
on.
somebody, Dr. Tahir, is somebody who wants to share.
Oh, please.
Yeah, just a little note for before we end. But thank you so much for having me on this conference, on this talk. Actually, I was hooked up with a presentation, and I'm just really amazed on how these projects is coming to a success rate already by imagining presenting this to the world. It really opens up different kinds of perspective and possibilities as well, that these children are encouraged to think beyond the ordinary and explore the vast realms, the reality of how kids are being raised up, and how it's really day in the life really varies from different countries and different cultures. And also, the more than the cultural exploration, I think these stories involve into different characters, into unique backgrounds, which is which are endless. I think that those names are just 1% maybe, or there's a lot of rooms to explore different customs as well, different values, allowing some our readers and our readers in our site broaden the understanding on how diversity cultivate a sense of empathy as how we progress on this project. I'm excited to read some of the the stories of the kids and the website. I tried to check on it. I just wish that these kids draw the actual shoes that they written in the story. I think that would be like there's a personalization touch on, like me, if I'm doing my story, I want my shoes to be kind of blue with a white on it, and there's a different design on it, just to make it personalized and very unique for their personalities and stories. But overall, it's pretty much perfect. Thanks
I
again,
love that
Dr.
idea.
Clarke and Dr. Coleman.
Yeah, that's such a cool idea. And I love that it's getting you to think, and sharing this is getting other ideas. One interesting thing that I thought about with Laura's presentation, when you were talking about curatorial voice, and I thought how similar that is to what I do in education, right? The curator is also kind of guiding, supporting, like, shepherding, thinking towards empathy, towards different universality. And that's exactly what I'm doing in education, and I hadn't really thought about that similarity. So thank you. I thought that I wrote down curator as educator. That's a similarity. I thought that was really interesting, and I really enjoyed shoes as a psychological phenomenon, and thinking about that, that cultural artifact, as you said, universality, although not necessarily for everyone. But I thought that is a real powerful symbol for children and adults. So thank you for sharing that today.
Thank you for your presentation as well. And if there aren't any more questions, turn it over to Mohammed for the final word.
Thank you. So this is the 4th day of our week of kindness program. The next program is tomorrow. We have a closing session, and there's a movie that is going to be viewed. It's called Admissions. Admissions are part of the forgiveness. Admissions are part of the live stream. And I welcome you to be a part of the program tomorrow and see how the part of the life goes on with kindness, with forgiveness, and the things that are most essential in our day-to-day life, be it at work or at home or in family or in friends, wherever we are. Thank you for your time, and thank you for all the help. Laura, I forgot to mention you are one of the key board members of Center for Excellence, Empathy and Diversity, and your support, as all others, are very significant. And thank you for being right at the point where we will have to share the shoes of different colors, shoes of different shades. And that brings to my mind, shoes in British sizes have a different measurement compared to the American size of measurement. So for me, shoe is not the one single piece to say, okay, I'll wear your shoes. What shoes can I wear? Is it a British standard shoes or American standard shoes or no standard shoes? Thank you for shoes, and but I'm using is the one that comes to my mind. Thanks a lot. Have a good day. Take care.